I am on a mission to build my library to 500 books and teach some of the insights on the way, which is why I would like to introduce a new recurring type of video to the classroom, a monthly recap of the books that I read that month. Because that way, I can keep myself accountable on a monthly basis to stay on track, and also pass on a lot of these recommendations in the meantime, because I will be teaching full lessons on every single book that I read, just for practical reasons. So, with that in mind, let's start the August 2025 recap with our first book, The Art of Counselling by Rollo May. I really enjoyed this one, and I found it very, very practical and easy to read. And there are two big takeaways for me from this, which are the importance of courage, as well as the importance of empathy in any helping profession. Now, the empathy part is fairly self-explanatory, but the point about courage is a little bit less obvious. I particularly enjoyed the reframe on page 125, which says, "The goal is to have the counselee leave the conversation feeling courageous, not necessarily happy." And for me, that's a good reminder that even just on a personal basis, my personality it should be an achievement. It's a healthy move towards growth and away from safety. And that takes me out of my comfort zone and into unknown territory. So I'm only going to grow if I have the courage to repeatedly and voluntarily do this. And if I'm trying to help others achieve exactly this, then I need to be consciously embodying that myself. And he quotes Jung very, very nicely on page 79 as well, which I really enjoyed. It's the most beautifully clear way, far better than ever I could put it in words, but this one. Be the man through whom you wish to influence others. And there's also a nice distinction early on in the book about what the healthy and integrated personality looks like. So I might do a video on that as well in the future. The quick version for now is that it's characterized by freedom and individuality and social integration and religious tension. So if you are interested in exploring that as an idea, then I would definitely recommend The Art of Counselling by Rollo May. So next up, we have Narcissism, Denial of the True Self by Alexander Lowen. This is definitely a more complex and technical read than that first book, but there's a lot of crossover themes, especially to do with power and control. And for me, the biggest takeaway was the difference between the image of the self and the actual self. So going through the dangers of falling in love with the image of who you think you are, and then being so obsessed with keeping up this idea that you end up distorting the facts about what is actually true in your real life because it falls short of that idealized image, which, spoiler alert, it doesn't go particularly well. So I'll put a quote on the screen from page 51, just this part on here, because it is quite a long one. But there's massive links between persona and shadow work in a Jungian sense. And it's a good reminder of the importance of shadow projection and the fact that we need to be careful when we unfairly throw onto others something without realizing that it just reflects more about us if we pay closer attention. I've already made a video on the 3-2-1 process to notice this shadow projection and to start a process of reclaiming it. So this book has helped to show how superiority and weakness are actually linked together and how we can use this as a call for action. It's a good reminder for me because this links directly to other books that I've already read. So the library is starting to reinforce and support itself, which is a good sign. And not only that, but I would say that the denial of feeling itself was probably my favourite chapter. So if you feel like you're dissociated from your body, or you feel like you love the idealised image of yourself a little bit too much, more than your actual reality, or maybe that you feel like you're just wearing masks all the time and feel the need to perform, then you might enjoy this book, or any others from Alexander Lowen as well. And the next one is Illness as Metaphor by Susan Sontag. It's a super short one, this one, and it essentially made the same point repeatedly, so I've not got too much to say about it, which is we need to see illness for what it is, an illness, and de-mythologize it. So it was an interesting exploration around the use of metaphors and how that impacts how we view illnesses to begin with. In particular, by over psychologizing certain illnesses, we make them either more than what they are or less than what they are, which is just a physical illness, and that's it. There's a really nice little quote here on page 18 that summarizes that. A disease of the lungs is, metaphorically, a disease of the soul. Cancer is a disease that can strike anywhere. It's a disease of the body. Far from revealing anything spiritual, it reveals that the body is all too woefully just the body. And most of the book just goes into more detail on that vein. So, for example, tuberculosis affects the lungs, which has crossovers with the metaphorical idea of spirit and the breath of God. So it was an overly romanticized illness compared to something like a cancer, which doesn't have that associated imagery at all. I found it an interesting read. I probably won't return to this one, but it was interesting at the very least, and it was quite short as well. All right, next one is Ordinary Ecstasy, The Dialectics of Human Psychology by John Rowan. This book, however, I absolutely loved. So this is a very, very thorough breakdown of humanistic psychology, and it gives a good overview of lots of different practices, from counselling to Gestalt therapy to transpersonal ideas to group work, as well as how you'd actually use something like this for yourself. And I like that one of the chapters goes into detail as to why it is both optimistic and not optimistic at the same time, and why we actually need to hold this paradox in tension if we want to work towards integration and self-actualization. And there's some amazing tables and diagrams in here as well, which I absolutely love. Like comparing all these various different ideas from different thinkers and showing how they all link together. I'll definitely be teaching a lesson on something from this book soon. Probably about the idea of holding contradictions together without going mad, because I feel like that applies quite widely, and there's a good amount of information in this on here. I'll give you one little quote on here just from page 29. Where is it? Here it is. Because it backs up that Rollo May book from before quite nicely, The Art of Counselling. So I'll slightly shorten it here just for the sake of time, but I will put the full quote on the screen for you. It's just this part down here. Any therapy which aims at adjustment, at the cure of symptoms, at the reduction of anxiety and so forth, is simply enabling the person to go on functioning at the old level, in the old way. The goal of such therapy is to avoid change rather than embrace it. For the real transformation, it needs to aim at liberation. So it's quite controversial, it's quite blunt, and I quite like this. It gets you thinking. And like I was saying before, this is why I like a lot of these books, because they reference and they support each other. And that's how I find a lot of them to begin with. I see which parts of the books I like, and then I highlight those books in the bibliography. So for example, if we look at this, and then I shop around online or in person, and I see just which are the easiest to get. So I'm not reading just random books, although it might look like that at first. What I'm doing is I'm reading books that back each other up, so that I've got this huge resource, which is always updating. For hyper obsessives like me, this is genuinely very exciting. Maybe some of you will agree or disagree, I don't know. Anyway, seemingly probably completely unrelated, here is a very different book. It is Positioning by, I think this is pronounced Al Rees and Jack Trout. I don't really have much to say about this one, as I'm slowly turning this library building project from a hobby that I was doing just for fun to a more viable business. I'm reading up on some business books to get some ideas. So I like the idea from this one that it's more useful to focus on how the customer or the client views the things that you are selling, rather than me focus on exactly the right wording on my end in order to communicate it. It's also helped me realise just how over-communicated we are with all the messages that we're bombarded with. So actually, very little of the message gets through anyway. And a very reassuring thing for me from this book is that it's definitely helped to reassure that my long-term vision, it is actually valid, and that I just need to focus on simplifying my message. So that's something I can work on, so I'm perfectly happy with that. But anyway, here we go. By far and away, my top pick for August. It is this one. It is Integral Ecology by Sean Esbjorn Hagens and Michael Zimmerman. This is probably the single most advanced book in my library so far. It took me ages to read this. It is so good and it is so thorough. If you like Ken Wilber and integral theory and spiral dynamics, then it is essentially just that applied in enormous detail to ecology specifically. So it's 800 pages of extremely well-researched ideas. And what I absolutely love is that this entire section from page about 530 onwards, I think. Let me just double check, because I like to be specific on this. It's just, it's about 538. It's just expanding on the footnotes that they included. So literally from here, this is still including the footnotes and the explanations. Like basically all of this is a full book in itself, just of footnotes. I don't even know where to begin in terms of explaining this one. There's full breakdowns of the AQAL map from integral theory, which I've already done a video on previously. That's the all quadrants, all levels approach. But it doesn't just go into the individual and the collective and the internal and the external parts of those, but it breaks it down even further. Like on page 174 and 175. Let me just get this up on here because I think you might absolutely love this. It doesn't just give you some basic ideas, it then breaks it all down into different niches and different schools of thought so that you can actually start to apply this in huge detail. And then not only that, just on the next page, for example, it then goes through a formula to make this even more specific still, and then also how all this will be viewed differently, depending on what your perspective is anyway. So, for example, if you said something really simple like, when I think about how the tree in the park is being destroyed by pollution, I feel sad. Like that reveals an incredibly large amount of information when you break it all down. So what we need to be thinking about is who, how, and what, and plug it all into this very specific formula, which again gets broken down massively as well. I absolutely love a book that goes into enormous detail like this. And even the word nature, that's not much use. We need to specify whether we mean nature, or nature, depending on where we put the capital letters. Like, I absolutely love this level of hyper-obsessive detail. So this will either put you off completely, or you'll be thinking, oh, this sounds amazing for how ridiculously specific it is. If you're like me and you get if you get excited by this level of obsessive detail, then I would definitely recommend it. But like I say, it's definitely one for the advanced reader, because even just the nature part, that will cause massive issues in misunderstanding, and that's quite early on in the book. So that's the August book stack. We had a bit of business, we had a bit of psychology with these two. We had a bit of professional learning and the skills around counselling and around coaching. And then we had an absolutely massive heaping of ecology and dense, but still practical philosophy. And if you're wondering how I've done all of this, I read between 1 and 4 hours a day, which is how I've got through all of this. And it's a mixture of personal and professional reading. There's no speed reading tips or tricks or hacks. It's just a lot of hours of putting my head down and just enjoying the process. So don't overthink it. If you can take just a handful of ideas from these books, and well, that's it. That's good work. You don't have to memorize every single word. So just take the pressure off yourself if you've set up yourself for this like super high baseline. All right, that's it from me. See you around in a future lesson, and I'll see you then. Bye bye.